So today's video is going to be focusing on looking at what the impacts of marijuana legalization would look like in a place like the United States, federally across the board and in all of the states themselves, and sort of the parallels that can be taken from that and applied to places like Canada, where legalization is sort of on the precipice but not yet happened. Looking at the advantages and drawbacks, and specifically looking at Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, looking at what's happened there because they are places where marijuana has been legalized and is being sold, and seeing sort of as a small case study for what that potentially could represent across the country and across North America. So let's jump right into the video.
Check out financesdoneright.com for all of your personal finance needs.
So right off the bat, there are some pretty undeniable benefits for what marijuana legalization would achieve, and the most obvious is tax benefits. Right off the bat, when you have something like marijuana, similar to alcohol, tobacco, and other things, you can tax it pretty significantly, and you can generate a lot of revenue very quickly off of that. And looking at Oregon, Washington, and Colorado and seeing what's happened there, they have already generated over $500 million in tax revenue off marijuana legalization. And those are relatively small states comparatively to places like California, where even more money's been made, and the potential for a countrywide legalization, it can generate a lot of money. And that is a huge benefit, because when you look at the American government and other governments like the Canadian government, they're running pretty significant deficits right now. They're spending a lot of money, and they need ways to generate revenue. And this is a very simple and easy way to generate a lot of revenue pretty quickly. And it's a very simple thing for them to do. All they have to do is legalize it, then they can start taxing it. And so that's a very easily measurable benefit of marijuana legalization right off the bat. But there are a ton of sort of side benefits or potentially intrinsic benefits that legalization would have that are less measurable, but undoubtedly would have massive impacts. The first being the sort of cost effectiveness or cost savings when it comes to law enforcement. When you look at the United States, the amount of money they spend on enforcing their drug laws is obscene. They spend $3.6 billion a year enforcing marijuana laws. $3.6 billion. That's a ton of money. When you look at the $500 million for sort of tax revenue generated, that's great. But you can also save $3.6 billion by simply getting rid of marijuana sort of arrests and incarcerations. It represents a massive cost for the United States. Since 2001 to 2010, there were over 7 million drug arrests in the United States related to marijuana. And these aren't Pablo Escobar. These people that are being arrested, they're individuals with a little bit of marijuana, they smoke on the weekend. They're not these drug kingpins. They're not causing the drug war in the United States. These are just regular folks that like marijuana, and it's costing the US government a considerable amount of money to sort of enforce this drug war and continue this drug war, which they're losing, and it's not a winnable thing for them. They spend an incredible amount of time arresting people, the court systems that have to process these people, the bureaucratic nightmare of controlling all of this, and then you also have to have them in prisons, and that costs a lot of money too. And it's just sort of an obscene process that is completely unnecessary, and it's costing a ton of money. You also look at sort of the side problem that most of the marijuana that's being supplied at this current time is through sort of illegal means. It's through drug cartels. It's through criminal organizations that use this as a revenue source. And the reality of the matter is that there's a lot of spin-off crime that happens because of that. These organizations will then get involved in weapons, they'll get involved in other criminal activities, and it has a lot of spin-off effects. And they use marijuana as a primary revenue source to be able to do this. So by legalizing marijuana and getting the supply through things like dispensaries and through legal means, you take a huge source of income away from criminal organizations, away from drug cartels, and that will help sort of hurt the other aspects of their business that the police and law enforcement also have to deal with. So these are very hard to measure effects. Obviously, you look at the $3.6 billion that they're paying to enforce these marijuana laws, and you say, well, yes, you can get rid of that, and immediately that is a lot of costs out of the way. But there's also a lot of other sort of side issues that are created by this when it comes to drug cartels, when it comes to things like that, that are also costing the government a lot of money and would be greatly aided by the legalization of marijuana. And another sort of one of these side issues that comes with marijuana being criminalized is that you have a lot of people ending up in prison, and this costs taxpayers money. That's sort of part of that $3.6 billion that I mentioned before. But another huge issue is that these people aren't contributing to society. They're a burden in the sense that they cost the taxpayer money, but they're also a burden in the sense that they are not contributing. They themselves are not providing taxes. They themselves are not working. They're not creating the economy, growth in the economy. They're not growing it. They're not working. And that is, again, one of those things that's very hard to measure, but is clearly a downside of having marijuana criminalized. So right off the bat, there's some pretty obvious benefits. What are some of the more common drawbacks that people associate with marijuana legalization? Well, one of the main ones is sort of an ideological opinion, and that's really not something that can be measured when it comes to the economic side. It's people with sort of religious beliefs that are very hardline against drugs, and whatever your opinion may be when it comes to that, it still doesn't make sense to have marijuana criminalized. Because, looking at a historical example, in fact, when you look at the Prohibition, this was a time period where there was a lot of religion mixed with government, and so alcohol was something that was banned for a period of time. And what happened was you had a similar effect with marijuana, where there was illegal speakeasies where people would go to drink alcohol because people wanted to drink alcohol. And ultimately people found a way. And so what happened was you had all these criminal organizations associated with the supply and demand of alcohol. And the reality of the matter is the government, while they did ban it, they weren't able to stop it. And that is a very similar thing with marijuana. Realistically, you cannot stop it. You can ban it. You can say it's illegal. You can arrest people. You can spend all this time incarcerating them. It won't stop it, though. So even if you are 100% against marijuana, even if you are 100% against drugs, the reality of the matter is people will find a way if they want it. And so it makes more sense to legalize it and then regulate it. That way you have some manner of control over the system instead of having it just being a Wild West where people are doing whatever they want. So even if you are an ideologue who is completely against drugs, and just to clarify, I myself do not partake in marijuana. I don't really have a bias when it comes to wanting to smoke weed. I very much am just someone who wants the government to get another tax source so they can fix some of their problems. It just doesn't make sense from really any standpoint on why you would not regulate it. Another major issue that people bring up often is the idea of traffic incidents and sort of traffic deaths and issues along those lines. Very similar to drinking and driving. Driving under the influence of drugs has a similar effect where you are impaired and you are going to make worse decisions when it comes to driving. An important thing to note, though, looking at Oregon, Washington, and Colorado, there has not been a significant increases in driving incidents related to marijuana. There has not been an increase. That's really, really important to note. It is certainly a concern. It is a very valid concern, but the legalization of marijuana has not increased those incidents, and that is a very important thing to note. And once again, it's one of those situations where once you legalize it, once you decriminalize it, and you start to regulate it, you can focus on education. You can put out more advertising campaigns around ensuring that people don't drive under the influence of drugs. There's a lot of things you can do once you do regulate it, and that makes it's sort of a valid concern on what might happen, but it still makes sense to decriminalize and then regulate instead of keeping it criminalized. And a third, one of the more major issues that I do come across is the idea of youth also using marijuana, and that's sort of happening with people under the age of 18, and there certainly has been research into people with developing minds smoking marijuana that can have some pretty adverse effects. And once again, looking at Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, and looking at what's happened since they have legalized marijuana, there has not been a significant increase among the youth. It's one of those situations where it's out there, and once you do decriminalize and regulate, you can control who has access to it. It's very much like alcohol. Kids who want to get access to alcohol are going to get access to alcohol regardless of whether it's criminalized or decriminalized. Same thing with marijuana. And it's really, really important to note, legalizing it did not lead to any increases. And once you do legalize it, you have money that you can use to do campaigns about education, educating kids that it's not safe for them to be smoking this before their brains are fully developed. There's so much power that you get when you regulate the system. It doesn't make sense. There is no rational argument against regulating marijuana. There's no rational argument. Another major benefit that is sort of, one of those very hard things to measure is there's an opioid crisis right now in the United States and North America in general, where there is a massive dependency on these manufactured drugs, these opioids that are having a devastating effect. People are dying, people are addicted to these highly dangerous drugs, these drugs that often lead to things like heroin. They have very adverse side effects, and a lot of these drugs are being used as painkillers and sort of things to deal with pain when you have a very easy alternative in marijuana. Marijuana is a natural drug. Yes, there are obviously side effects. Yes, if you're smoking it, that will increase your chance of lung cancer. But marijuana versus opioids, I think most people are going to say marijuana is better. And it will have a massive impact immediately if it was regulated and decriminalized across the country. It would have a massive impact. And the opioid crisis is costing a lot of money. Again, it's one of those things that's very hard to measure. It's very hard to get an exact number on what it's costing. When you look at the amount of deaths that it's caused, you look at the amount of educational campaigns that have to go around this, the programs to get people who are addicted off of opioids. These things are costing a ton of money. And the legalization of marijuana could go greatly towards fixing that problem. So realistically, the only people that have a valid argument for marijuana to continue to stay criminalized are prison unions, because, realistically, if marijuana gets decriminalized, there's going to be a lot less people in prisons. So you might lose your job. If you're part of Big Pharma, that's sort of the second really only people that have a valid argument for keeping marijuana criminalized, because they want their opioids to stay the primary source on the market for their services. And the third is politicians who need this drug war to push through policy. Anyone else, there is not a valid argument against decriminalizing marijuana. Even if you are completely against drugs, by regulating it, you have more control over the system. You have more control, simply. And there is no valid argument. If you do have differing opinions, I would actually like to hear them. I personally don't think there are a lot of very strong counter-arguments to decriminalizing it. I don't really think there's a lot of non-ideological arguments. If there are, I would be happy to hear them. If they're based in fact and if there's research done around them, I would legitimately like to hear. So I'd like to hear your comments down below. And again, as always, if you like the video, very much appreciate a like, share, and subscribe. Well, you've reached the end of the video, but don't worry, you can get access to more content at financesdoneright.com, where you'll find a bunch of tools, information, and articles that you can use to help improve your personal finances. You can also check out the 2 videos to my left if you want more content, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on anything. And, as always, have a great day.